All right, we're live. Hello, welcome to Dive into World Building. And today we are talking about food paths. This is a way of phrasing this topic that I came up with after I announced it on my blog earlier, but that's okay. So basically what I'm thinking about is the path that food travels when it from its source to the point of ingestion. And because in particular, I was thinking about how many stops there are along the way, right? Mm-hmm. And how many people are involved. Because, you know, if you're wandering through the woods and you pick nuts off a tree, that is a very short food path. Right? You might have to hit them with a rock or something. But if you're picking berries off a bush, you just stuff them in your mouth and then you're done. But if you are going down to the store to buy, say, Doritos, that is a food that has a much longer path. Mm-hmm. And it's much harder to tell who is on that path too. Mm-hmm. So where the food has been and who has been responsible for producing it are other questions that I think are quite relevant here. And so I'm hoping we can kind of explore some aspects of this and maybe get into some speculation for fictional purposes. Thoughts?
Yeah, there's very
Go.
The picking nuts off the tree or berries off the bush is, I'm guessing, the shortest. Picking something out of your garden and just sitting there in the garden eating the peas that your mother told you to bring into the house so she could use them for dinner.
Honey, what did you do with all the rest of the peas? I know
Mom, you were looking out the window. What do you think happened to them?
Yeah, well, I guess one could say that is still a short path, but involves more work because there's another person involved. I mean, assuming that you're the kid and there were moms and possibly dads or possibly relatives or friends involved in the creation of the garden.
Yeah.
Right? So.
And then if it's one that you planted from commercial seeds,
mm-hmm.
that's an even longer path because where did the seeds come from? Do you know the source of those? So.
And there's also a split in, I think, dry goods versus things that need a cold chain.
Yeah.
So, and then also liquids, and which often do, but also they will have where did they come from and how long is that chain into the past, and who all was involved in getting a liquid to wherever the point of purchase or ingestion.
Right. And I mean, when you say liquid, do you mean things like water or juice or that kind of stuff?
I mean juice, I mean milk.
Mm-hmm.
We could certainly put alcohol in that category.
Yep.
Yeah. I don't know. What other things do we drink?
Soda.
Soda, yeah.
The more complex a thing, the more things that are in it, the more individual paths there are.
Yeah, I mean, because one of the things that came up in my brain, this probably coalesced in my brain as a result of a number of things. One of which was our health discussion the other day, right? Because say you're in a position of dealing with food poisoning epidemic or outbreak, what do they call it, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do you trace where the food poisoning came from?
Mm-hmm.
Right? You got to follow back along that path and try to say, okay, what was going on? Who was involved? Where could contaminants or bacteria have been introduced? I mean, Yeah, it seems like one of those sort of hidden factors that some people make it a very important point to track, but we don't always think it all the way through. And certainly in terms of creating fictional worlds and talking about what people are eating on a table in a tavern somewhere, we might be inclined just to stick the food on the tavern table, but it's probably worth thinking about how it got there. Right?
Yeah, that actually was a tangent. Actually, no, it was kind of part of the main plot for a Deep Space Nine episode that I just happened to watch the other night. There was a virus on the spaceship that was being transmitted via food, and all the replicators were broken.
Mm.
And it turns out Quark had broken into an empty quarter and was using a contaminated replicator to feed everybody. And so that was,
wow.
yeah. Never really thought of Star Trek and epidemiology before, but there you go.
Yeah, well, you know what? I'm glad they did it. Because frankly, it's nice to think that they have got their bases covered on some of this stuff. Sorry, I've got weird light things happening in my space. I'll change it around a little bit.
Yes. Who are these people? Do they know that Jesus is a baby killer?
Okay. Hi. Goodbye.
How you doing? Are you a wannabe Christian, a fake Christian? What are you?
Okay.
Yeah,
we
that's
don't need
about
him.
right.
I don't know what that was. Anyway, so virus affecting the crew. That's right. That was what I was taking notes on. Good thing he came in while I was adjusting the light levels, because now we're good. Traced to broken replicator. Yay. Yeah, that is cool. I mean, you don't see food poisoning plots a lot, I guess. Every so often, though, apparently you do see them. So, so that's nice. And I'm still having weird reflected light on my face. But whatever. I think I'm going to give up. Yeah.
Well, and I mean, if you think about it, it's not even necessarily contamination. It's not always what's in the food. It's also what isn't.
Yeah.
Because that's how we got scurvy.
Yeah.
And ways of dealing with that. And had that not happened, we probably wouldn't have the vitamin knowledge that we do now.
Yeah.
Or Wonder Bread, now that I think about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. But a thing that you can throw in, if you have a world that has multiple religions, as we've done in other dives, some religions have dietary rules. And so,
and a lot of the rules about the food path, aren't they?
Oh, they really are. What I mean, it's because it's not even just, if you're really observant, it's not just, is there pork in this? It's, okay, great, it's beef. Where was the beef processed? Where did it, who slaughtered it? How was it slaughtered? That's what I'm getting to. So
yeah, halal and kosher.
Yeah.
And also, as you can see on any wrapper you pretty much pick up now, especially in the case of manufactured food, it's not even what's actually in that piece of food, but what other contaminants were processed by that machinery, and those pieces are still left there.
Yeah.
Yeah, the allergies issue. Good idea. Yeah.
Well, any label that says this this was processed in a factory that also processes shellfish. I don't know what the ruling is on, because the contaminants might be enough to trigger an allergy, an allergic reaction.
Yep.
But they're probably not enough to violate kashrut.
Yeah.
On the other hand, if you know that there's a good chance that the contaminants are there. This is an ask a rabbi question. But it's also, not quite the. It's a side issue. The rules. but religion and allergies and border conditions, where different cultures and different medical conditions meet.
Yep. So one of the things that I was thinking about when I was sort of brainstorming on this idea was the degree to which the food is changed. And when there are many ways to interpret that, but so are we accustomed to buying chickens without their feet or heads on? With their guts already pulled out, with their feathers already removed, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's
being done somewhere by somebody, either directly or indirectly, with whether it's done by machine or whatever. There's a way, right? That this happened. The food didn't. The chicken didn't. Sacrifice itself and make sure that its limbs were removed in certain ways.
Mm-hmm.
So I think of chickens, I think of fish, right? When you buy fish in a place where they sell whole fish, you can opt for different levels of cleaning, including head removal, right? Scale removal, different degrees to which you can have other people do the work of cleaning the fish for you. And sometimes you can watch them do it in front of you, right? Mm-hmm. But then, of course, there are other options where, you're seeing a piece of food and it's been fashioned into a complex and lovely confection of some variety, and you can't even tell what it's made of, right? Right. So there's a bit of that going on. I mean, when we're talking about things like chickens and fish, you get things like the way that people sell chicken breast tenders all by themselves, right?
Or chicken nuggets or fish sticks.
Or chicken nuggets or fish sticks. Oh boy.
Yeah, hot dogs.
Yeah.
Now, some of it is
go ahead,
processing. Jane. Some of it's like it's processing because there's like a way to sell it in great quantity, and then some of it started like things like sausages and stuff were processed for preservation. So, but it's like I think it's like when mechanization entered food production is when you saw these vast changes with like the Industrial Revolution, when you could the mechanically separated chicken parts, which I mean, who knows what that is? Nobody probably wants to know it. So you have all these things where it's a machine is doing it because it can do it faster and cheaper than one person spending 5 hours slaughtering and taking apart a pig, or what, I don't know how long it takes to butcher something. But
so I'm reminded of our conversation with Spencer when he was talking about wilderness survival. He was talking about how many hours it would take to process a deer for consumption if you killed one. And I believe he said it was something on the order of 30 to 40 hours. And that you would have to render the fat, and you would have to smoke the meat so that it wouldn't go bad before you could possibly have a chance at consuming all of it. It's, for those who are interested, they can go back and check out Spencer's Hangout report or the video, because that was a really interesting conversation. Anyway, it was super interesting, and it takes a really, really long time. We I think the narratives spoil us a bit.
Mm-hmm. Well, it also takes specialized knowledge that we no longer have.
Right.
You know, how many of you really know what it means to cut tongue-shaped pieces and hang them on a rack? Well, what kind of rack and for how long? And can it be raining? We don't know.
Yeah, it's raining. Yeah, so I believe he was talking about deserts at the time, but yeah, he was talking about building a smokehouse, right?
Yeah. But even so much as, you know, how do you create a spit? And what are you going to make it over? And how do you build the right fire for that? Do we know that? I think a lot of people don't.
Well, I think most people don't.
It's interesting watching Top Chef where every once in a while they do have them, usually in a team or as part of the challenge, they'll have to butcher a whole animal carcass, and like half the chefs are like, oh yeah, no problem, I do this all the time in my restaurant, I was raised doing this. And then half of them are like, I've never done this, what is even happening? So so even it's like, you know, you get the people who have stuck with and are interested in this traditional knowledge, and then other people who aren't, and it's just interesting what comes in handy.
Yeah, for sure.
And also, you know, parts of the animal, especially animals that we don't think of as food most of the time. So you got your chitlins, you got your sweetbreads, and there are a lot of people who don't actually know what that actually is.
Yep. This is what I thought of actually a minute ago when Jay was talking about sausages. There are lots of different foods that were invented so that we could get the nutrition out of the odds and ends that aren't really pretty cuts of meat off an animal.
Yeah, most
like
sort of
sausages,
slavery and Filipino food in particular.
Haggis, which is cooked in a sheep's stomach.
Haggis. I'm sorry, I may be alone on that one, but I love haggis.
Good for you. I personally have not eaten a lot of it, but it sounds intriguing to me. Well, if somebody presented me with it, I wouldn't be like, I can't try this, you know, because I'm like really curious about it.
Well, yeah, and there's also the thing about, you know, what things are not considered food in your culture, but then you go to the Mexican restaurant and there you have the opportunity to have menudo, and that's tripe.
Yeah.
So, and that's not something that Westerners eat a whole heck of a lot.
Yep. Or, you know, pork feet.
Yep, tongue.
You know, tongue and brains and, you know, the list goes on.
Basically, every part of the animal that's not like, that is edible, that is humanly edible, and that's quite a bit. I remember watching, I think it was Andrew Zimmern, or no, the other one, Anthony Bourdain in Jamaica. And he went to a stand and served a soup that was made with cow skin. And it was just very, very, very chewy. Because there was sort of, there was, I mean, it wasn't, you know, it was, well, like, okay, I chew my cuticles a lot. And so, like, skin is really, really chewy. And I thought about that because I was thinking, I'm like, oh my God, that sounds so gross. And then I'm like, wait a minute. You chew your cuticles off on a constant basis. I eat my own
skin. I should not be talking.
Basically, I'm like, I chew my cuticles. Okay, I'll go to Jamaica. I'll try the cow skin soup. Let's do this thing.
And there's also
things are great.
Yeah, and there's also the addition that a lot of the stuff that isn't humanly edible is still culturally useful. And some of it is edible after a lot of processing. That's gelatin.
Yeah.
And that's also how we get glue.
Yeah.
I was going to mention soup broth. You know, where you boil the bones and
bone
get
broth.
That, you know.
Yep. And there's isinglass, which is fish stomach and things like that, or swim bladder, actually.
What?
So,
cool.
Which parts of the skin would you use for soup? When I assume it's parts that wouldn't be useful for leather, assuming you've got a culture that also uses leather.
Probably the thin ones and also odds and ends.
Yeah. Because there wasn't any hair in the soup. So it was like, I'm assuming it was maybe under the like outer epidermis or something. I'm not 100% on that. It may have just been that they, shaved it and burned the hair off.
Well, most cattle hide is split anyway.
Okay.
So you have the inner and outer.
Okay, yeah. Okay.
Yep.
Yep.
So yeah, no, these are all things. What's what's the Arab culture is usually offer your guest the eyes and see whether they'll eat them. Sort of thing. Some of it's a dare.
Yeah. The eyeballs.
There's also a whole bunch of cultural stuff around eating fat.
Mm-hmm.
Because in, northern cultures, that's actually a food item.
Yeah.
Muktuk, things like that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, it's high calorie, and in like it seems like the animals, far northern animals, have very, very thick layers of fat for insulation. Mm-hmm. So, that's like, I don't know, probably not 2/3 of your animal, but like, I don't know, 1/3 or quarter or whatever ratio it is. So you've got that, and it is, it's this high calorie thing for intake.
It's not just high calorie either. They store vitamin C there. Mm-hmm. Or I'm sorry, some vitamin, I don't remember which now. D possibly. Vitamin. In the fat. And so you need that in order to have a full diet there.
Yeah. I remember watching something about Italian food, and they were talking about how Southern Italian cooking is the one using olive oil, and Northern Italian cooking uses butter. And it's a difference. It was a difference in climate and how many animals were kept. So, you maybe vegetables might be your main fat rather than an animal.
Right. And actually, I'm going to just throw a little wrench into the works here. since we're talking about the path of the food overall, tomatoes are not originally an Italian thing.
Oh, no. And if we want to go into the Colombian exchange, we could be here all day. Because so much stuff.
I don't need us to go diving into that.
Yeah.
But I think it's worth just mentioning it, right? I'm going to wave my hands at it and then say goodbye. Yeah. But the origin of where the foods originated is sometimes relevant. Like, I don't know, like, I'm trying to think of science fiction that features major large-scale food exchange problems, like something that happened to the Columbian exchange, like, is that something you've encountered?
I'm looking at my library.
I have not. Weirdly, I just read this book, and it took place in this very isolated village that they made a point of it being very isolated on the moors. Uh-huh. And they kept talking about all these characters drink tea. And I was really frustrated with the book because, one of the main things was there are no strangers in this town. No one ever seemed to come to the town. No one ever left the town. And I'm like, where are they getting their tea from? And it just bothered me intensely through the whole book.
If you want to argue about that, tea is a relatively flexible word.
Yes.
Which gets applied to lots of tisane, like herbal infusions and stuff.
Yep.
So So depending on how the tea was described,
it was just tea. There was no descriptor of it. It was just tea.
Yeah.
So it could have been the local herbal infusion, which would be perfectly plausible. But if it was an infusion of Camellia sinensis and somehow got to the town without actually having anybody bring it there, that's a little more puzzling, right?
Yeah, but it was just one of those things that for some reason it stood out and bothered me for the entire book.
Yeah.
Because there were no mentions of shops in the town. There was no mention of like, you know, when they're talking about its deep isolation, they don't mention it, except for these traders who come from such and such town. You know, there was like
a town that has no traders.
There was nothing, and that bothered me. And same with like the food. I'm like, how are these people raising enough food? Are they entirely self-sufficient? What is happening? I don't know. It just
well, then there's the question of can you magically produce food?
Yeah.
Which doesn't, that's not a question that I often see taken on in magical worlds. Like, people can often conjure up things and then they're, out and starving and you're like, you got a wand, man.
Well, like Harry Potter, where like I don't even know like how they made food in that. They were really just waved their hands and like piles of fucking food appeared, and I'm just like, whatever.
Yeah, well, so I think in conjuring food, so one of the problems with conjuring food is it erases the food path, right?
Yeah.
And so you kind of go, are we creating mass here?
Right. Yeah. And if we are, what exact, universal constants are we working under in this universe?
Yeah, well, I think to some degree, and we've had this discussion before with folks who use magic systems, but sometimes magic just does not have to be answerable to universal constants.
Yeah, that's the kind of fiction I don't read.
Yeah, well, see,
that bothered me in Harry Potter.
Some people really care about it, and some don't.
Yeah,
right. But I think that you would run into, you might run into people who don't necessarily care about whether you conjure food or not, but who are going to be telling you, well, I don't really like to restrict my magic that much, right? I remember Nnedi Okorafor saying something like that, and Sylvia Moreno Garcia talking about how magic systems were just sort of almost like she didn't want to model them on physics, which is a specific kind of choice, right?
Yeah.
An authorial choice, and it's totally valid. But there are some things that you may run into as a reader where you're like, wait, what? Yeah. Wait, how did that work again? So,
is it? You say your spell, is it the creation of food, or is it a transportation of food?
Right. But then, when transportation of food, where did you transport it from, and who made it?
Yeah.
We can also wave our hands and say house elves, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
But that adds an entirely new dimension to the whole problem.
Well, and there's also the thing of, in a lot of, I would first quibble with, if the magic has no system, then it's not a system of magic. But also,
well, that's true, by definition.
Yeah, but also, usually in magic, there's a price to be paid for it. And so in the process of conjuring, say, food, how much are you losing? How much energy do you lose in doing this? And as such, can you ever sustain yourself because you're using more energy to create the food than you get from eating the food?
Yeah.
So are you just prolonging your own starvation with
with
donuts?
conjuring of food?
Yeah.
So probably won't find any of us here conjuring food in our stories anytime soon.
I think it would be hysterical though to have whoever it is being far from home and conjuring it out of their own pantry. So when the cook goes to look the next day, they're like, "Where did everything go?"
I have a witch who I'm not even entirely sure where she keeps it, but she has a stash of chocolate bars.
Yeah.
And when she's finished a job and is particularly pleased, or just she has like a chocolate bar, she'll conjure it. She'll move it. It's not a creation of a chocolate bar. So when she's eaten the last, Toblerone in her stash,
She has to go to the
she
store.
can't just. She has to go to the store. And the question, one question that might be asked is, how much does it cost her to do that versus how much does it cost, say, her apprentice?
Right.
Yeah,
so she can do an entire bar, but her apprentice has to be
just one triangle.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. That's all you get. We'll teach you Heath's Crunch next week.
Yeah.
And there's also a question of how much do you actually know about the culture that you're conjuring food from? Because what's making me think of this is there was just an article the other day on blue cornmeal in sort of Navajo culture, and because they don't have I don't remember what I know. Corn, if you're just eating corn, you will end up with a bunch of dietary diseases because it has lots of nutrients, but it's not released by eating it by humans. So what you have to do in order to make it work is you have to mix it with some spruce ash. And there's a chemical process called nixtamalization, which then releases those nutrients to be available for the body. And this is something that's really well known for the corn cultures of the Southwest. There's always a lime additive or some sort of additive that releases those nutrients. Otherwise, the culture wouldn't be there.
Yeah. And lime being the chemical, not the fruit.
Yes, indeed. But yeah, I mean, and actually, if you're gonna make guacamole and you want it to sit around for more than 2 or 3 hours, you better add actual lime or lemon to it.
Right?
Yeah.
Right.
Or you're done.
Prevent oxidation.
Yes.
Of course, I've never had guacamole sit around for very long.
Yeah, it doesn't last long around here either. But
no.
I live alone. It's my bane. It also begs the question of since we're talking about food and how you get that, it also begs the question of where does your medicine come from and how is that put together? And where did we learn that from? Which is always good to have witches in your story because they usually do that.
Yeah. So in terms of food tasting things, because a lot of stories, fantasy stories particularly, will have food tasters if you're dealing with assassination attempts and the like.
Oh yeah.
And then you'll also have in science fiction stories, because technology tends to split itself. The bring me a sealed bottle of whatever, because I'm not going to imbibe something that I didn't see being opened, which means you're trusting the whole path that you haven't seen.
Yep.
And you better not have any such thing as needles, hollow ones in this society, because it's really easy to get through a cork.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah, so I have a taster in my novel, and he gets poisoned.
That's awkward.
I love that though, because otherwise it's just Chekhov's taster.
Right.
Yeah. You're waiting for that, or I'm always waiting for that.
Well, so like if you have a taster, then why are they there again? It's like putting the gun on the, this is the Chekhov thing, right? The gun on the mantelpiece. You're going to bring in a taster. Well, yeah. That gives me a thought, but it's not a related thought. So I'm gonna say, let's not go down that way. Actually,
I also wonder about, like, when we talk about food and we talk about, even if we're eating things, okay, we live in a swamp and we're eating frogs. If you've got a community of 50 or 60 people, how long are there going to be frogs in that swamp? Because I bet not long.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we don't get a lot of that either.
No.
Sustainable food chains.
Yeah, sustainable harvesting. I think very quickly you would learn how to farm frogs, or you'd have to keep moving.
Which is
Which, I don't think I've ever seen in a story anyone explain why the nomads were nomads.
Mm-hmm.
Now I have ideas.
This is good. This is what the show is for.
Well, I was thinking, when I was writing the work in progress this morning, I was like, okay, how many examples have you seen of faux coffee?
A lot.
There's a bunch.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you just change a few of the letters and you've got not coffee.
There's a lot of direct substitution strategy being used in the world building of the world.
Oh, yes. Well, and that's like, at least Anne McCaffrey, not only did she have claw, they actually had claw bushes that they would go and find, which was great. Because
it had bark that you had to like strip off and do things to.
Yeah, I have bark in my kitchen right now. It's if you grind it up real fine, it's called cinnamon.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I did like that about Claw, actually.
Yeah, I did too. She actually had pretty defined chains of just about everything, if you think about it. Because the wherries existed, the herd beasts existed, they all ate stuff. She introduced big predators later and they ate stuff. It was great. I'm having trouble trying to figure out what dinosaurs ate, because the paleontology really isn't there.
There's
a lot
not
of
enough examples of like preserved stomach content.
There's not. And if you think about what kind of ecology, say, Wyoming had, what I got to it with the last paper I found, they said, well, the dinosaurs were eating flowering plants. I'm like, well, that's kind of a big, huge topic. But all of a sudden I was like, oh, okay, so if you think about Bambi and you think about flower, like gambling through the flowers and eating them, and then you put in an ankylosaur, and it's less cute.
I don't know. I like ankylosaurs.
This is part of the thing is that I'm getting into is that I have to find other things for them to do other than rend tooth and claw, because they mated and had babies and hung around and laid in the sun, and there were all other things that they did, and I have to figure out what they ate and how I can recreate an ecology that they can live in.
Yeah,
because I don't think Jurassic Park never got there.
Yeah. So I'm going to mention another thing that I ran into, which was I was reading this book. I won't tell you what it was. And there was this town that had been like cut off with a wall from everywhere around it. But the bodegas still had stuff.
What is that?
And I was like, okay, so maybe I'm just going to kind of give the author the benefit of the doubt and say there were checkpoints, right? But they would have been really busy checkpoints too.
Yeah. It's like, sort of like, how I know you haven't researched Siegecraft? Because that's how you... maybe there were people on the outside with trebuchets who were, throwing chickens into town every morning.
bales of wheat.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Because that's another one of those perennial issues we have with animals.
Yeah.
Of people are like, yes, well, we rode the horses for 15 hours at a gallop, which is not going to happen. But also, when you're done, where are the oats? Where's the hay? What are the horses eating?
Yeah. Yeah.
That is frequently phrased as a horse is not a motorcycle. But you know what? There's only so far you can go on a motorcycle before you have to feed it.
Yep.
That's
and
true
what
too.
do you do if that overheats?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Giving it a bath in a river is probably not the best plan.
Really not. And you have to take care of your motorcycle's feet too.
Mm-hmm.
Oh dear. Yeah. So I'll bring up a little funny thing that I've been playing around with lately. This has to do with my novel world, which is so freaking ridiculously huge. Okay.
I have no idea what that's like.
Yeah, you do. Anyway, so this world is ridiculously huge, and so as I go through spending more and more time on it, I keep finding little questions that I haven't answered. Right? And I'm like, I have these little floating sparks that float around. Okay. And they're like basically little energy creatures. But they're part of an ecosystem.
Yep.
And so I'm like, okay, so now I have to understand what their role is in the ecosystem. And I had figured out some things about them, right? I had figured out some things about their role in the ecosystem, but I had not figured out other things. And so, for example, one of the things that I most recently figured out is that the plants that have co-evolved with these things are giving off some form of radiation or energy that these things pick up and consume.
Sure.
Okay. And they then so that was actually a big deal though. Because if you brought in a plant that was not from this ecosystem, you could not assume that it was necessarily giving off the same form of energy.
Yes.
And so the creatures might be more interested in destroying it than consuming it, right? Because they don't have the energy that they would normally look for, right? And if their role in the ecosystem, so what I basically decided is that they act like forest fires with creature level intelligence. So their role to benefit the plants that they eat the energy off of is to do things like help germinate seeds and help clear out dead plant material and stuff like that. They just do it more intentionally than a lightning strike. Right?
Right. And so in the interest of them having more food to have, they would then want to destroy the plants that aren't their food source, yes?
Yeah.
Okay.
Which makes it really hard to say bring in an agricultural plant from another region and try to cultivate it in large quantities.
Because you have
two realize there's agricultures.
Yeah.
What?
You have two competing agricultures.
Yes.
The sparks and
because the sparks have their own sort of form of agriculture, right?
Yeah.
Where they're clearing out dead things in order to leave more room for new things that produce the energy to grow up, right?
Yep.
So it added a bunch of complications to what I was doing.
You're not that far off the science either, by the way.
What?
You're not that far off the science either, by the way.
Okay.
because plants do emit radiation, and there are insects that are attracted to certain plants because of the kind of radiation they give off. It can be done in colors. It's usually rendered for us so that we can see it in colors.
That's true.
But if you look at plants under UV and a couple of other different radiation schemes, you can see what the bees are seeing. And all of a sudden, the things that they really want really just jump right out at you.
Yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm. So part of the goal here, part of the underpinning of this is to have a world that seems fantasy at first glance, but really isn't.
I like this plan.
Well, one of the things I like about it is that it helps me tie things down. So like, if you're like, well, what would sparks do in XYZ circumstance? Then you have a path of reasoning that helps you to decide what they actually do. And it's not like, well, now I have to make up what they do. Right? You could deduce what they do based on some principles that you've got established for these things, right? So it was a form of agriculture.
If you think about it, world building is a type of setting your own limits. And one of the worst things you can do to a class full of writers is say, oh, well, just write anything.
Yeah.
And they hate that. I hate that. But if you want to give me some constraints under which I can write, now I've got something I can do. Well,
it's like in science when they talk about the theory being too powerful.
Yeah.
Right? It's not disprovable. It doesn't really, it could do everything. So it doesn't really have any way, you don't have any way of determining whether it actually operates or not. Right? So it is very helpful to have structure that you can kind of hang your plans on. Right? Yeah. So anyway, so that was I guess what you would call a sort of an alternate alien food path that I was figuring out this week.
Yeah.
Which was kind of fun. Yay.
No, sorry. Now my head is just spinning. I'm like, so they take the part of the they're taking the parts of these certain animals in the way that our thing works. So what else could they do? Okay, I'm gonna stop. This is really
yeah. Yep. Well, anyway, so look, that was the hour suddenly.
Was it? Oh my God.
Yeah.
it went right by. So, you guys are amazing. Thank you for being here. I hope you'll stay after to chat for a bit. I will I don't know how many people watch these things all the way to the end, but I'm going to put in a plug because my novella comes out on Thursday. What?
Yay!
Cool.
This is in Clark's World, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, good for you.
Yeah, I'm really excited.
Watching you give birth to that was,
must stay calm. Yeah. So anyway, go find it, enjoy, and yes. And
what's it called?
It's called The Persistence of Blood.
Yes.
And so, yeah, and it has blood. it has birth control and baby making and genetic decline and politics and all kinds of interesting things in it. So anyway, yeah, and a very, very persistent protagonist.
She is indeed.
So there we are, and hopefully people will like it. But I'm just gonna be really happy to see it online. Yay! Anyway, thank you all for being here. We're about to hit a new month. Wow.
It's happened so quickly now.
Yeah, life is busy, right? But I'm happy to have you all here, and we're just going to meet on Tuesdays continuing forward. So far, this is working out more or less for me. So yay! I may feel a little distracted when I get in here, but I'm good. we're able to make this work. So Next week, you know what? I'm going to say again, I have to figure out next week. I'm sorry about that, but it's on the Facebook group, and I always tweet it on Monday night at the latest. So hopefully I will see you then, and I'll stop the broadcast.